Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I'm down here at Cockle Bay, Darling Harbour, on this Friday morning, this Friday winter morning, and it's quite pleasant to tell you the truth. It is indeed overcast, but it's not as windy as what it was yesterday, and definitely not as cold or as chilly. Anyway, I've just come down here today because I'm doing some training, some HSR training, health and safety representative training at the CFMEU headquarters, and the course starts at 8:30, so I've got a bit of time to go through and deliver another book summary in the tradition of Jim's 5am Club. And this morning's book summary is an interesting one, and it's entitled Unlocking Leadership Mindtraps by an author known as Jennifer Garvey Berger. Jennifer Garvey Berger is going to share with us some life hacks, some business hacks on how to unlock leadership mind traps. And I guess there are some lessons here that we can all use in our daily lives. It just doesn't relate to business and corporate life. It's something that we can use in our family life, in our relationships, and across the board, because without doubt there are a number of biases which influence and impact our choices, and being aware of these biases, being aware of these mind traps are going to help us in a big way to at least make mindful decisions that take into consideration the first, second and third level consequences, so that we're not blindsided, so that we're not surprised at some point in the future, that at least we've had an opportunity to consider them in advance, weigh them up, and make a decision, make a choice that serves us in the best light, in the best possible way, so that we make, fewer decisions and fewer mistakes, or face fewer challenges. We are going to make mistakes, there's no doubt about it, and we are going to have a number of issues, but it's all good. So what do we learn? What do we take from this? I guess the important thing to understand from this author, and they kick off with a discussion, and they say that, or she says that, with complexity, and we do live in a very, very complex world, with complexity we need diversity of experience, we need diversity of approach, we need diversity of ideas, and we need to learn how to harness conflict rather than to push it away or sweep it under the carpet. So the author here mentions to us that our default thinking patterns often lead us incorrectly in complexity. This is really interesting, because what we're saying is that our default thinking patterns are really good when we have to make simple decisions that don't include complexity, are not convoluted, are not difficult. But when we have situations, and in the world that we live in today, we have a lot more interfaces, albeit virtual interfaces, but there are a lot more impacts that we have, and a lot more people that we need to interface with, and of course impact by our choices and our decisions. So what the author here is saying is that our default thinking patterns, they may have helped us in the past, they may have been great in our past life or in previous generations. Our forefathers' life would not have been anywhere near as complex as our life is today. So our default thinking patterns often lead us incorrectly, according to this author, in times of complexity. And this is really important to understand, that the world is complex. All the things that we do these days have multiple impacts, and we don't have the bandwidth in order to be able to think it through properly, because we're short on time, we're compressed, we have deadlines hitting us significantly all the time. And the science tells us today that the amount of information that we're bombarded with on a daily basis now is more than what 2 generations ago, so our great-grandparents and our grandparents, we have a lot more information hitting us or trying to get to us on a daily basis that would have touched our forefathers in a whole year of their life, and in some cases in a whole lifetime. So the author details 5 mind traps, and we'll go through each of these mind traps one by one and see what we can learn and see what we can take away. The first one is simple stories, making things a lot simpler in our minds than what they actually are. So sometimes people simplify things to the point where they it's a disservice to them and to others around them. The next mind trap that the author talks about is rightness. Then we've got agreement, control, and ego. So I'll keep on walking because I need to be over in Piermont within half an hour, and it's probably about a half an hour walk away. So let's walk and talk, and we'll do the best to see the beauty of this part of Sydney. So the author then kicks on to talk about mindfulness, and she says that mindfulness is the most powerful way to help you lead yourself and others effectively in complex environments. And not only is mindfulness important, but collaboration and cooperation and diversity in experience, because what is actually happening is that, and I heard this years ago when I was working for Advantra, and we had a wonderful Chief Executive Officer known as Craig Cameron. He said that in a rapidly changing environment, and the environment today is a lot more rapidly changing than before, he says in a rapidly changing environment, we need to understand that nobody has been to the future. And experience, in many ways, counts for nothing, because things are rapidly changing, things are morphing, and you can't depend on what happened before. In yesteryear, for example, today would be just a similar expression of yesterday, which was a similar expression of the year before. Whereas today in our world, things are changing dramatically, rapidly. Overnight a government changes, and they have dramatically different policies to the government that was previously in power. So we need to understand that because nobody's been to the future, we can't rely on experience. Each person is probably in the best position to make the best decisions possible at a particular point in time, because you're closest to the stimulus, you're closest to the action. When I worked at IBM in the old days, they used to say that you are the best person in the world at doing your job, because you're doing your job, you're there, you've turned up. You know, you're working on it, you're committed, you're part of it, you're involved. Many other people, you know, can give opinion, can talk from the sidelines, but at the end of the day, it's the person who's actually got the responsibility and the accountability and is actually there day in, day out, who is the most important person at this particular time. So great leaders, according to this author, are aware of mind traps and work to break free and escape from their limiting clutches. It's a powerful statement, that is, that the leaders, the person who's a leader of a family, leader of an organisation, leader of a community, and a leader of themselves. At the end of the day, you can be a leader of yourself. All of these people need to be cognizant and to understand that there are mind traps aplenty that impact everybody around them, and those mind traps can lead us into falsehoods, can lead us to wrong decisions, can hastily put us under pressure that will impact us and impact many other people around them for years to come. The author talks about a thing called default thinking, and he says, or she says, that we often use default thinking patterns that came from simple environments from the past, which may be no longer useful in the complexity that we face today. As we said before, and especially for people of my generation who were in their 60s, the baby boomers, we came from a simpler world. We came from simpler times. We came from simpler environments where decisions were relatively easy to make because the consequences and the change wasn't as dramatic as what it is today. But as we said, we know these decisions, this default thinking pattern is no longer useful in the world such as we have today that is much more complex and much more rapidly changing. We rely on intuition that can be wrong, and often the right answer can be counterintuitive. This is pretty important as well. In a complex environment, which is rapidly changing, if you're using intuition, which you've picked up growing up, because we all have a different past. We all are going to experience a different present. I am here, you are there, you're somewhere else, and we're all picking up different slithers of reality. And these slithers of reality, when concatenated together and grouped together, will give us a different worldview, a different lens from which we can decide and which we can see the world, depending on what your focus is. So what we're saying is that all of these slithers of reality that we accumulate and concatenate throughout our lives influence the decisions that we make and the fears, uncertainty and doubts that we have as well. So what the author here is saying is that if we're relying on intuition, then you could be relying on something which is outdated. You could be relying on something that worked when you were growing up in simple environments, but today things are a lot more complex and they could be of a disservice to you as opposed to an advantage. So the right answer can often be, as the author mentions here, can often be counterintuitive. So sometimes we don't need to try harder. Sometimes we need to try to do something else because control, this is really important, this is powerful. Control is futile in complex environments because there are far too many interrelated parts. You can't harness things which are hard to A, identify, and B, group together. It's like herding cats. So the author here is saying that because there are so many interrelated parts, and conceptually we can't identify, see, and predict how those interrelated parts are going to react and respond, then it's futile to expect control in a complex environment. In a complex environment, it's hard to agree on the right answer and the right approach because there is no clear-cut path or solution. There are multiple paths and multiple solutions. Now, you put 100 economists in a room and you'll come up with 100 different views on how the economy is performing or what needs to be done to improve the economy. It just goes to show that complexity is hard. Complexity is challenging, and being too simple in your thinking in a complex environment could cause disaster. And to understand that there's no clear-cut path or solution, you just need to decide on the best option, do whatever you have to do, and then keep monitoring the situation. And if it's getting better, continue to do more of it. If it's getting worse, then you may need to make a dramatic change of direction, or just to refine your activity to try and help you get back on path. So the author then goes on to talk about the simple stories. As we say, sometimes when posed with a complex and a difficult situation, we try to simplify it in our minds so we can understand it. But this simplification, according to this author, can be dangerous because what you're doing is you're creating the narrative. You're creating the solution in your mind. And if your simplistic view is not correct, then it can lead you to a terrible or a substandard sort of outcome. There's a thing called a narrative fallacy. And now we've just been through an election, we've just been through a pandemic, and some people are just hooked and caught up in a particular narrative, and everybody's got a different narrative. But these narratives drive their conversations, drive their decisions, and drive their opinions. And that narrative could be false, it could be misguided. We saw Fat Boy Palmer and Craig Kelly. They had their narrative, which swept a lot of people up. Actually, 4% of the population voted for the Freedom Party. I even forget what they're called now. That's how much I didn't really rate them. But if you get caught up in the wrong narrative, if you get caught up in the wrong crowd, and every solution points back to a particular narrative, what happens then is you get caught up in that vortex, you get caught up in that stream, you get caught up in that rip, and you just keep on getting sucked into it, and you can't break out of it. There's a number of narratives that we've got at the moment. The my body, my choice. You've got the greening of energy. You've got all of these narratives, and these narratives now have taken over. And you're either in one camp or the other, depending on which narrative is popular. So it's not about which narrative is right. So I was very, very clear and very, very cautious in terms of what I said there. It's not about which narrative is right. It's more so these days about which narrative is popular. Which narrative do the middle class, upwardly mobile yuppies talk about in the inner city, who don't represent or don't reflect a typical Australian or a typical worker or a typical review or view on how the world operates or where the world is going. They've been caught up in what is cool, and what is trending, what is trendy, and what is trending. But as I say, all of these things cost money. All of these things have first, second, and third level consequences. All of these things are part of a complex and complicated world and problem, and there is no one person, absolutely no one person, who has the right view, the right solution, and the right answer to what is going on, because it's all far too complex. Don't listen to all the BS about the science is agreed on climate change and we need to do this, that and the other. All science is theory, and with all the biases, the narrative biases that we've just talked about, what we're saying is that you will end up coming up with all the answers to support your theories, because that's all you're looking for. You're just looking for things that are going to agree with the slither of reality that you see and the slither of reality that your narrative takes you along. So we need to understand that simple stories limit the range of thinking and possibilities and options, because these simple stories, these narratives, don't reflect complexity. And you've got to understand, in order to get people on board, you've got to dumb things down to the point where you miss out on a lot of the facts, a lot of the perspective, and you just deal with, and you're just trying to whip people up into an emotional frenzy, because you know that once you've got people emotionally locked in, then they don't use their logic, they don't use their rationale to look for other options and to weigh or balance the views that have been foisted upon them. So what happens is that stories, simple stories, don't reflect complexity. And what we do as humans, is our human nature, is that we fill in the pieces. So the narrative will take you along a path and say X, Y, and Z, and cleverly they allow you to fill in the pieces. And of course, they've structured the cards, they've dealt the cards in a way that will only lead you to one outcome, to one view. So you end up filling in the pieces innocently, but you're being manipulated massively by these narratives and these groups who have their own means and their own ends and their own reasons and motivations for doing what they're doing, but it's more so to benefit them rather than to benefit you, and definitely not to benefit future generations. So we fill in the missing pieces, looking from beginning, middle and end, and we assign roles of hero and villain. There doesn't necessarily need to be a hero, and there doesn't necessarily need to be villains in any scenario or any narrative, but we end up in our minds. Our mind plays the games with us and says that there needs to be a beginning, there needs to be a middle, there needs to be an end, there needs to be a hero and a villain, there needs to be right and wrong. But we know that there are confirmation biases, there are all these other biases, there's the halo effect, and life is full of contradictions. Contradictions that some people can see, yet other people want to ignore and to hide and to sweep under the carpet. So rightness is a trap. If you want to try and be right all the time, you're setting yourself up for massive pain. You're wiring yourself up for disappointment and relationship challenges. And sometimes people, in order to be right, will attach themselves to a group, to a personality, to a celebrity. Just because they say it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. We need to understand that just because somebody says something, if you don't critically think about it, if you don't try and understand it, and if you don't realise that things are far more complex than what people make it out, and there are no simple answers. If there were simple answers, then life would be very, very different. But we all have challenges, and we all know, we're trying to diet, we're trying to lose weight, and we can't do it because life isn't that simple. Life gets in the way. We have emotions, we have things that happen that impact us on a daily basis. So as we said before, rightness is a trap, and there is a thing called naive realism. Now, we're trapped in the world that we create, not in the world that exists, because we lack self-awareness. We're blind to our biases. There are experiences that trap us tightly. We have expectations placed on ourselves and others, and we need to try and be congruent. And this congruency, this fluency, as I said before, can trap us into doing things, into thinking about things, into agreeing to things that are cool, that are trending, but are not necessarily right, and don't necessarily reflect how we truly feel and what truly expresses and reflects our lives. So what else can we say here? We need to listen in order to win, and to make the right decisions, we need to learn from our mistakes and to understand that we're all different. We are all unique. I am different to you. You are different to your father, your mother. We're all different in our own ways, and we need to confirm. We need to be selective in what we do and who we hang out with, and we need to not fear rejection. Because what happens is we're trapped by agreement. People get you to agree to things. People put things, ideas into your mouth, and you end up agreeing to things because somebody's put those words into your mouth, and once you've agreed to it, subconsciously or not directly, then you're trapped by that agreement. So we need to understand that we don't have to be lumped into particular groups and in particular thought patterns. And emotions have shades. They're not binary. We have different emotions at different times throughout the day. We need to understand and appreciate that. And to be able to name our emotions is a point that the author makes here. And to be aware and to be cautious of shallow agreements. And sometimes it's better just to disagree and not to take sides, because there isn't always a beginning, middle and end. There isn't, as I said before, always a hero and a villain. These are constructs that we create in our own minds. These are things that manipulation from others are able to generate. So we need to be cautious that we're not sucked in to a particular narrative or a particular way of thinking or a particular group think, just because, as I said before, because it's trending and trendy. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club. I think I'm running a little bit behind time, so I'm going to have to pick up the pace. So thanks for joining me on this book summary called Unlocking Leadership Mindtraps. And I hope that we've all picked up something new, something useful. I most definitely have. I really enjoy these topics. And being in Sydney on such a beautiful morning is also a bonus. So thank you, and we'll chat again. Yassas, and bye for now from Jim's 5am Club on this magnificent Friday morning. Bye for now.